In the age of streaming, some people are starting to notice that something has changed. Movies don't look quite the same. Maybe they can't quite define it, or they just blame CGI and visual effects. But as we've already talked about, there are some technical differences between the way movies used to be made and how they're made now. I made a whole video talking about the 7 reasons why movies don't look like movies anymore, but I want to go beyond that and ask the question, are movies getting uglier? This is obviously very subjective, and I'm by no means saying that these filmmakers aren't talented. There is a lot of skill, passion, and devotion that goes into making something as big and complicated as a movie. But if you listen to what fans have to say, a lot of them are pointing out that things are starting to look worse, and even in some cases, sound worse. Many people having to watch movies and TV shows with the captions turned on because they can't hear any of the dialogue.
Damage to one structure won't compromise the other.
I'm going to try and point to the changes that have objectively happened to films over the years since their beginning, and help paint a picture why some things might be perceived as being uglier than they were before. But before we get started, like this video, hit the subscribe button, and consider joining the channel. Channel members get exclusive access to Filmmaker Alchemy, behind-the-scenes lessons and insights into the business of video production. Learn how to turn your content into gold. But first, we should probably define film. What is film? Well, it's celluloid, and it was actually the first synthetic plastic ever developed. And it was invented in the 1860s, and it's actually coated with light-sensitive chemicals that react when they're exposed to light.
It is on this emulsion that the photographic image is picked up. The principal ingredient of the sensitizing salts is silver. The Kodak Works uses more than 5 tons of silver every week. These wide strips of celluloid later are slit into narrow strips of motion picture film, 35 millimeters wide and 1,000 feet in length.
And that's what we refer to as film, this celluloid, this plastic. So if you have any notion about film being better, or maybe you hold it in a higher regard, just remember at the end of the day, film is essentially just plastic. And film came with a lot of problems that filmmakers were always trying to solve for. The first one being that film equipment tends to be very expensive and requires a high skill level to operate properly, both shooting and developing the film after the fact. You've got the problem that celluloid is kind of delicate and fragile and can be easily messed with, scratched, or hairs will get on it, or it'll easily get damaged.
All right, roll 'em, Frank. Speed.
P10, take 2, track 110.
Shooting on film meant everything was big and heavy, and it took a lot of people, huge crews, to manage these film sets. Of course, you needed tons of power, electricity, to power these heavy-duty lights of this era. You couldn't just plug a light into the wall outlet and get enough juice to expose properly. So everything was big, heavy, bright, and hot. And ultimately, it gave you footage that was grainy and still imperfect. Those scratches, those hairs, all those little imperfections were driving filmmakers mad. Today, we might reminisce on this time.
Have you thought of me much, Doc?
And think of how aesthetically pleasing those aspects are. But at the time, when it's the only technology available, these are all incredibly frustrating to deal with because there are always problems you're trying to account for.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
But digital was no good solution when it first arrived on the scenes. Large digital sensors were incredibly expensive and difficult to make at the time. So almost every digital sensor was relatively small compared to 35mm film, let alone the larger film sizes.
The actual chips that are in the camera are smaller than a 35mm film image. That meant the performance of the lens actually had to be better than a 35mm lens, since you were using a smaller area to image the entire high-resolution frame on.
And these early digital sensors were terrible when it came to dynamic range and color. It just didn't match what you were able to capture with that celluloid plastic. And yeah, film was delicate and fragile, but digital didn't have a good way to store its content either, dealing with magnetic tapes and really limited hard drive space.
In the computer, it's so simple.
We're talking megabytes and maybe gigabytes. No one was even thinking about terabytes, which is very common today, but back during this era, File sizes were small, and so was the storage space. And even if you used expensive media, those tapes still quite couldn't capture the full range of what these poor digital sensors were doing. It was kind of a lose-lose at both steps in the equation. This resulted in footage that was noisy instead of grainy like you might get in film. Digital, there's a lot of noise, especially at those higher ISOs and in darker environments. And you're ultimately limited by very low resolution. Again, just because those file sizes and storage solutions weren't fully developed yet, giving you that cheap digital look, especially when compared to film. Now again, from today's perspective, you might look back at early digital productions and admire that aesthetic. You might even want to recreate it in today's day and age.
I hate it when he does that.
But again, for the time when it's all the technology you have to work with, it's all you know, you're constantly trying to troubleshoot these problems. So technology pushed forward and digital continued to improve over time, as things tend to do, to the point where every aspect got better. Nowadays, film equipment is very affordable. You can go on Amazon and buy pretty much an entire production kit if you wanted for maybe even less than $1,000. We've reached a point where storage, file sizes, all of it is basically infinite. Whether using the cloud or a local hard drive solution, we've got terabytes and terabytes, up to petabytes in some cases. That is still, again, reasonably affordable. Over that same period of time, everything got smaller and lighter, from the lights to the cameras, to the memory cards, the microphones, and the audio recorders. Now you can film with lights that never get hot and require very little power and still give you enough output that's going to match what the camera needs, giving you footage that is clean, smooth, and essentially perfect. No grain, no noise, no imperfections at all. But this comes with some unintended consequences. There are some side effects to this advancement of technology. This is everything we already talked about in the 7 reasons why movies don't look like movies anymore, but just to recap, we've got wider, faster lenses that are sharper than ever before, which leads to shallower depth of field as a stylistic choice from time to time. Digital cameras have a much greater dynamic range than ever before. We're seeing softer and softer lighting, the ability to shoot with higher and higher ISOs, recording for ridiculously long takes, and you can easily move the camera a whole lot more than you ever could before. These are all a direct result of that advancement in technology. So now we have modern cinema, and it's not even at the cinema. It's on your TV, streaming, it's in your TV shows. Everything has kind of become ubiquitous in terms of how it's produced. Yes, individual filmmakers and creators may have their personal preference and choice on how they approach something.
Let's roll.
But for the most part, whether you're shooting film or television or YouTube content, a lot of it uses the same equipment and the same techniques, leading to the emergence of a lot of new styles, that shallow depth of field, that beautiful background blur. You've got creators on YouTube pioneering new ways to tell stories through personal projects, daily vlogs that look more cinematic than some movies from 30 years ago. You've also got creators developing content for the short form space, that quick editing style, that fast-paced storytelling, keeping viewers hooked and constantly trying to recapture their attention. And these are essentially new audiences at a global scale. And yes, anyone younger than me pretty much grew up online as a digital native, to the point where now it's kind of a bad term, but we do talk about brain rot. The doom scrolling, the constant need for new input, and an appetite for endless amounts of content. So with all these new styles and formats, the question is this ugly? Well, if you want to look at ugly like an acronym, certainly. We've got ultra wide lenses in use, gimbals galore, low contrast, and ultimately a more YouTube style aesthetic. But I don't necessarily mean it is ugly, it's different. Because we've had so many radical advancements in technology, cameras and lenses, drones and gimbals, microphones and recorders, lighting and modifiers, editing and color, and of course, visual effects and CGI have all gotten a huge upgrade over the last 20 years. Meaning literally every part of a film production has changed, from the equipment that's used to the software making film, television, video, and content, all very different than they ever were before. But it's good to remind ourselves that everything changes. Music, art, sports, and literature have all changed dramatically over the course of history. Different styles, genres, methodologies, and rules ebb and flow over the years. If you compare anything now to stuff from 100 years ago, it's all going to look and sound and feel radically different. So what is cinematic? Is it black and white? Is it the transatlantic accent?
Katharine Hepburn and Robert Helpman, world-famous stage and screen personalities, arrive in Sydney for an Australian tour of 3 Shakespearean plays for the Old Vic Company.
So help me, Dexter. If you say another word,
I'm through, Red. For the moment, I've had my say.
Is it a certain aspect ratio that's more cinematic than another? CinemaScope, perhaps?
For just such breathtaking scenes of beauty, CinemaScope was created, as it takes you for the first time into fabled, fabulous Italy. Nothing but CinemaScope could capture such tremendous breadth and scope. You see more because there is more on the film to see.
Maybe it's 4:3, and that's the most cinematic. That's at least what A24 seems to think is cinematic these days. Maybe it's that elusive film grain that just can't keep up with today's compression demands, and the moment you add it to your footage, immediately when you upload it, everything looks terrible. I think these are all elements that can feel cinematic, but I like to define cinematic a little differently.
Anybody does any killing around here, I'll do it.
Okay, fatso. It's killing you want. Come on.
Is it enjoyable to look at? Is it free of any visual distractions? Does it pull you into the story? Because for me, cinematic means I'm immersed in what I'm watching. I'm not paying attention to the focal lengths or the lighting or the color because I'm that immersed in the story. When those things start to stand out, that's when it feels less cinematic to me. Because now instead of engaging with the movie or show, I'm noticing all these visual components that are distracting me from paying attention to why I'm there in the first place. So yes, when a oneer lasts forever and now I start paying attention to the fact that there hasn't been a cut, there hasn't been an edit, now I'm paying attention to the camera work and the fact that they're not cutting instead of watching the story itself. And when the image is so dark and underexposed and I can't hardly see what's on the screen, I'm sitting there wondering why they did this instead of paying attention to the story. Or when there's some crazy, ridiculous camera move and it feels like I'm floating through a video game and there's CGI and visual effects everywhere and the lighting is soft and there's no contrast and everything is pixel perfect, I feel like I'm looking at a render, not real life. I think a lot of the technological advancements have made things better, but they've just come with those side effects, those consequences that are oftentimes unintended. So when you start to notice those choices, you can also understand and appreciate when a modern movie is free of those distractions, where you can sit back, tune out, relax, and enjoy the story unfolding on the screen. The language of cinema has changed, and it will continue to change, just like books and music sound very different over the decades. Nowadays, it can be hard to read a book if it's over 100 years old, or it can be difficult to listen to music that isn't from the last 50 years.
Mother of God, it's all toilet sounds.
But at the same time, there are elements that make a piece timeless. Most art doesn't survive more than a century, but when it does, that's what we call a classic. The stuff that's so good, it doesn't matter what year you were born or what generation you're a part of. And it almost always comes down to it being greater than the sum of its parts. For movies, it's a whole lot more than the visuals. It's the sound design, it's the acting.
None of you have ever wanted me here.
Why should we want to keep you here against your will?
Because you're all jealous.
It's the hair and makeup, the wardrobe, the special effects, the writing, the story, the directing.
If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work hard.
Choreography, editing, and distribution. There are almost too many parts to a movie to add them all up.
No.
But sometimes it all comes together so perfectly, so effortlessly, that it makes something truly magical. And whether it was shot on celluloid plastic or even an early digital sensor, that's just one part of the equation. So I'd say no, I don't think movies and television are getting uglier. I think there's some modern traits that stand out and can become kind of a distraction, but there's a lot of modern examples that still look incredible. beautiful, rich images that capture and hold your attention. Pictures that are just a dazzle and delight to look at. It's about how the technology is used and the craftsmanship that goes into these works of art. I think you might see a lot of ugly stuff out there because the demands for content are higher than they ever have been before. But if you pay attention, you can still find some great examples of really beautiful films made in the last 10 years, being made now, and that will be made well into the future.